what we think is incredibly important dissemination where we engage with policymakers and researchers, bring the two together on one platform so that they can have an exchange of views. Before COVID, we would do it face to face. These were gatherings of 70, 80 people, but very, very good, very frank, very open discussions. You have attended one or two sessions, Dr. Bahar Massoud, you're familiar with that. But since COVID, we've switched on to the internet, and I must say the advantage is that we now have a much larger reach, and we can also have an international audience attending these discussions, which is fantastic. Now, the context for the series that we are starting today will be with Naji Ben Hassin, the country director for World Bank, will be providing that context. I will just say a couple of words, which is that Pakistan can ill afford this disruption in its growth cycle, which has become all too frequent in the last 15 years. This needs to be broken, and getting our fiscal house in order, both on the expenditure side and the tax side, is going to be absolutely critical. Now, I won't talk about the expenditure side, but on the tax side, we will be looking at, in this series of 4 webinars, we'll be looking at central issues that affect personal income taxation, which is the topic for today. We will also be talking about provincial taxes, agricultural income tax, for example, and other provincial taxes. We have a comprehensive session on property tax, which we think is a highly underexplored area for revenue, for doing a lot of public service and infrastructure activities in the cities and elsewhere. And we will also be looking at sales tax issues, especially the harmonization issue across provinces. So that's the range of topics that we'll cover in this series. We have a fantastic panel to discuss these topics. Today's panel is absolutely wonderful, and Naji Ben Hassin will introduce the panel. I just want to say that I am absolutely delighted that Dr. Waqar Massoud could find the time. He's an incredibly busy man. I know from my other engagements with him, and it's fantastic that he's able to find the time to chair the panel. And also, I can't imagine a better moderator of this discussion than him. So with that, it's over to Naji Ben Hassin.
Thank you very much, Ijaz, and thanks to everyone for joining, and for our panel members. I'm really, really excited to welcome you to the second webinar of the new Pakistan Development Policy Series 2021 that we launched a few weeks back with the first issue on secondary cities. Today's topic is absolutely crucial, unlocking Pakistan income tax potential. I'm really excited that we are doing this jointly with CDPR, and fully agree with you, Ijaz, that it's going to be exciting to have this as a series on the tax topic. So there's a number of topics to cover, so I won't repeat what you said, but totally agree on the importance of these untapped potentials to increase revenues for the government. We have an extremely knowledgeable and quite diverse panel that will inform us today, not only about the issues, but also focus on solutions and guidance on how to increase tax collection, income tax collection, be it on the tax base or the capacity to collect the taxes. So our panelists include first Dr. Waqar Massoud, and Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on Revenue. I really thank you so much for making the time today. Dr. Michael Best, who's Assistant Professor of Economics at Columbia University in New York. Thank you also for joining. Mrs. Atila Mumtaz, who's Head of Corporate Accounting in the Risk and Tax Department at JAZ. Thank you as well. Mr. Ali Khizar, who's the Head of Research at Business Recorder. Thank you so much. And last but not least, my colleague Sebastian James, who's a senior tax specialist with the World Bank. This is a very, very good panel. So really looking forward to learning from you. And I really thank Dr. Wahab Masoud for accepting to animate this debate and this discussion. I won't say much more except to underline the potential to increase tax collection in Pakistan. Currently, with 11.4% of GDP collected in taxes in fiscal year 20, the potential, when you compare to other countries of a similar condition, similar income, Pakistan could close to double that. That's our estimate of what the tax gap is close to 10.4% of GDP, and income taxes are about a third of these tax revenues that are generated. So it plays an important part, and the potential is equally important to raise that stream of revenues. And the issues that will be discussed today and that know of will be eager to learn about the solutions range from fragmentation of the income tax between what's collected by the provinces in terms of agricultural income to non-agricultural income, which is collected by the federal government. The tax base is narrow, as you know. There's disproportionate taxation. There's high tax expenditures and tax breaks and exemptions in the economy, which create distortions and missed revenues, and a lot of reliance, 70% on withholding taxes and other issues that will be discussed today. But a number of analyses has been conducted in trying to understand these issues by the government, by international partners, by researchers, independent think tanks. But there's a need to focus more maybe on finding the solutions, and this is what we will all strive to do today. So again, thanks to everyone for joining, and let's proceed to Dr. Waqat Masoud Khan, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on Revenue, whom I thank again for accepting to help us unpack these issues in this seminar today with this excellent panel. Over to you. Thank you very much. Over to you, Dr. Waqat.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm also delighted to join this webinar on an important topic. All of you are aware about the centrality of tax effort in moving forward in economic development. Well, I will not take much of the time. Let us start. I may be guided if there are, if I have to maintain an order. Otherwise, I see Khizr first. And can I ask Khizr to start the conversation?
Thank you, Dr. Saab, and thank you all the panelists for inviting me and having me there. It's a very interesting topic, and it's very close to my heart as well. As Naji suggested, that the tax to GDP ratio, Pakistan is about 11.5 to 12%. But when we see that our GDP is subject to rebasing, and that rebasing exercise is ongoing, and the increase in the GDP nominally by 15-20%, this tax to GDP ratio will come in single digits. It's miserably low, and it's the combination efforts of both provinces and the federal government. And when we have that kind of a tax revenue, we cannot really talk about the expenditures. There is a very limited 2-minute expenditure to control. So that's why the debate here is rightly so on the taxation side. So the problem is it's a twofold problem. A, the tax rates in Pakistan are high. B, the overall tax collection to GDP is low. So this means that the compliance issues are there. So if you know nothing about Pakistan economy, just you know that tax rates are high and tax to GDP is low, this implies that the people are not paying taxes. So there is a trust deficit, there is a gap. And because of the high rates, people are moving away from that as well. I mean, if I see the story and the history of the last 5, 10 years, or in fact, if I start from 2008, prior to that, we were moving before 2002 to 2008 in the right direction, and then that was because our GDP was growing, our formal GDP was growing, the manufacturing base was growing, and there was improvement in the tax collection. And our fiscal deficit came down to as low as 4% of GDP in 1 year, and the market interest rate will come down to 1 to 2%, while we have about on average the rate of 9% in the past 15 years. When after 2008, when we see this, the rates kept on increasing, you try to move into the value-added tax regime as well, and then that was the problem on indirect taxes, and we kept on moving in that way. But our taxation collection never really.
Ali, I have difficulty in hearing you. Can you, adjust your volume?
Is it better now?
Better, much better.
Okay, I'll try to speak louder. So the problem is this.
If I may interject just for 1 second, let's keep the opening statement for about 5 minutes or so, and then we will get into details. And let's have a round. Waqar, if that's okay with you, opening statement for 5 minutes, and then we'll have.
Sure, I didn't know the rules, so thank you for bringing them in.
Okay. I'll take 2 more minutes and come back to the subject that the income tax rate Pakistan were as high as 35%, and then there were some other taxes that move up to 40%. Now you move down that taxes to 29%, but then you move down to the indirect way of collecting that. I mean, 70% of our direct taxes are indirect, and 35% of total taxes are direct. So your direct taxes as a volunteer is just 4% of your taxes. So that's miserably low. And we see that when you have that high rate, people coming out of the system and they're ready to pay the penalty as a non-filer and pay the withholding tax. To me, the solution to move away from this is to lower the tax rate and use the digital means to work on that. We live in a digital world, and we know that FDR and Dr. know more than anyone else, that human interaction in FDR and the tax compliance structure with the various tax authorities in Pakistan is cumbersome. If we move that towards the digitization, if we move towards the transaction toward digitization by giving other incentives and lowering the tax rate, I think tax collection increase by enhancing the tax base. That is the basic problem. That's a fundamental problem. And we need to figure out how to enhance the tax base rather than increasing the tax rates from one or the other and ending the exemptions if they are any.
So Waqar, I have sent you a message on the order of speakers. I'm sorry this had not been conveyed to you earlier. So if from time to time, if you want to check the messages, you may get other prompts as well.
Yeah. Okay, it's from Elijah. Unfortunately, I don't see any messages, but
but it's on your WhatsApp. It's on your WhatsApp.
Oh, just 1 second, please. Let me correct it. All right, I got it. Allow me, Ijaz, to call first Akila Mumtaz.
Sure.
And I want to end Sebastian, and then I want to keep Michael Best as last, so that as you are aware that he is working on to have the whole spectrum of views,
yes.
And that would be very helpful for him. So I request Ms. Akila Mumtaz if she can kindly take the floor, take the mic.
Thank you very much, Waqar Saab. It's an honor to be a part of a panel that has so many heavyweights in there. I'm representing the industry, so I'll just speak a little bit on behalf of the industry. And from our perspective, I think the biggest problem that we have is the complexity that has been brought into the tax code in the last 20 to 25 years. Not just from the way the code is written, but also in its linkage with the compliance part, which is now through an online portal and through a digital system. But where probably the law and practice have become very far from each other. So right now, the tax code itself is extremely complex in that there are a lot of for direct taxation. There are numerous layers. There's a direct tax that you pay, which would be the corporate income tax. But if you don't qualify for that, then there are other minimum taxes that are applicable, and sometimes those minimum taxes are substantially large, especially for services sector, which make them prohibitive. Similarly, other than that, there are taxes that are being collected from consumers under the advanced tax regime, and they range from 5 to 12%, 12.5%. And Pakistan is probably one of the few countries in the world where this is being done. Thirdly, then we have the much discussed and much talked about withholding tax, where the rates differ from filers to non-filers. But the withholding tax rate sheet itself is almost 3 to 4 pages long, making it, again, an extremely complex setup and one that requires a lot of expense on companies' part to comply with. When you look at all these rates and then you look at this tax system, which is available, which is created by a company that we call PRAL, then you also start noticing the differences that or the deviations that now exist within that system. And one of the biggest, I think, pet peeves that the industry has is that not only is the industry collecting withholding taxes on behalf of the government, but if the counterparty is not a filer, then that expense is disallowed to the company. And I think these kind of anomalies are creating a lot of problems for the industry to even act as good taxpayers or tax collecting agents. The third area where I think the industry faces consistent problems with the way the system operates is with respect to audits or verification of its compliance or its tax returns. I think in between 2000 and 2008, one of the biggest things that was introduced in the income tax code was the self-assessment setup, which allowed companies to file their tax returns, and it was deemed assessed until questioned. What has happened since then is that every single thing is being questioned in that tax return to make sure that the tax authorities don't face a time-barred situation. With the end result that a lot of companies like ourselves find our entire P&L as well as the balance sheet being challenged in the first assessment order that we receive, which kind of defeats the purpose of a deemed self-assessment setup. What we also then have a problem with is the fact that our counterparties, which are sitting in the authorities, are when they want to verify those expenses, then there is one person who's there who wants to verify them manually, whereas we've invested $3 to $4 million in putting up an ERP system, which is being run by maybe 100 employees for the entire year. So for us to consolidate that on a piece of paper and try and explain it to a non-accountant across the table is a very difficult task. The final area where I think some recent changes have been made, where we're facing a lot more progressive sort of interaction with tax authorities is with respect to litigation. And over here, I do want to commend the FBR that at least they've introduced or reintroduced the forum of ADRC, which is Alternate Dispute Resolution Court, where sometimes we can take our problems and have them validated if things are not proceeding as one would want them to proceed in the normal forums like the tribunals and the courts. But I do think that if we look at the tax from these four aspects and give a 360 view to solving the problem of the industry, then it would help us participate better in the way things in participate better as good collection agents and as sort of partners for the government. So thank you.
Well, I tell you, you have touched upon matters which are very, very close to my heart, and I appreciate your discourse. But kindly tell me, I mean, what do you do? You say you are industry rep, but could you please tell me what are you doing?
Jeevakar Sahab, I work as the head of taxation and financial control for Jazz, and I think we were in the news a few months back with respect to a dispute that we had with the tax authorities, and we've been interacting with you, or at least our management has been.
Fine. Thank you, Atila. Now, Sebastian, you may kindly make your suggestions and intervention.
Want me to talk to Sebastian?
Yeah, Sebastian.
Thank you, Dr. Wakar. So I have been working with I've been working with the World Bank for 15 years now, and we've done a lot of work in Pakistan on the issue of trying to improve compliance, trying to improve tax collection. So a few things stand out. One of them, of course, is that if you look at Pakistan's collection as a percentage of GDP, it is slightly below average. So I think they were on average a couple of years ago, and then they started dropping. And that's a serious sign that Pakistan's tax collection is even below the average. Because when we calculate what we call the capacity or the potential, we compare it with the best performer, which has similar characteristics as Pakistan, for example, similar per capita GDP or similar other aspects of the economy. And so as of today, because the collection has dropped, the latest data I'm talking about is 2018-19, this is concerning. And so that's the first step, is in the medium term, what can Pakistan do to come back to what we call the average? So, and the second part is how they collect, the quantity and the quality. And I think this one of the key things that jumps out is the over-dependence, I would say, on withholding taxes. So it's not uncommon to use withholding taxes. Every country in the world uses it. But I would say one surprising factor is how much it's used. And as Ms. Akila had said, it's the same, if you have 3 pages of withholding, then your withholding becomes an alternative taxation system. And that's what you see in Pakistan's income tax, where the withholding system kind of replaces the income tax system. And there are a lot of problems with that withholding system. Over dependence on withholding may convert your income tax into another receipts or sales tax, and that's not the way it should go. At the same time, it's needed at times. With high evasion environment, you might need withholding. So that's another part that comes out. The third part that comes out is what you see is taxation of the formal economy, over taxation of the formal economy, and I would say kind of low or under taxation of the informal economy, which is, it's like a tautology, but it's, when I say informal, I mean the non-corporate, the non-large, the kind of small and medium people who are not working in large corporations or the government. You tend to see that where the economy is highly formalized, you do get a lot of revenue from there, but it also creates an opportunity for people to say, if I get formal, I'm going to get taxed more, so I might as well withdraw. So the pressure now is on the tax administration to say, how can I collect more from the informal and the not so large sectors? So I'd like to put these 3 points out there. I'm talking specifically of the income tax, and then we can proceed with further questions. Thank you very much.
Sebastian, could you repeat the first point? I mean, 70% of what you said was not audible. So can you kindly repeat the first point?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. The first point I said was that Pakistan's tax collection was on the average performance, that is just average of, I would say, countries with a similar level of, economic development. But in the last 2 years, it actually went down. So it's actually below average. And I think that is probably a very critical point right now, is to how to get back on track. Because they were on the track, at least on the average performer, but now they are kind of below average. And so that's the first part. And the second part is aspirational. It's not just average performance. You want to be the best performer. So that's when we say, how can Pakistan go from the average performer to the best performer? Thank you.
So Waqar, just procedural thing before we have Michael Best speak. All the panelists are aware of 5 or 6 questions around which the discussion has been organized. And as a refresher, you also are aware of those questions, but just as a refresher, I have put it in a WhatsApp message to you, the main driving questions for the discussion. So please refer to those as you get the panelists to speak. But Michael can go ahead with his opening statement.
All right. So now I invite Michael Best to take the mic.
Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here. This is going to be a fantastic panel. I'm very excited to hear everyone's perspectives. I was asked to think about 3 things, and so I'm sure we'll dive into those in a second. But I just wanted to sort of lay the groundwork by saying that, it's critical when we're thinking through issues about the income tax and the tax base to consider simultaneously the tax policies that are set and the way that they interact with the administration of said taxes. Because the combination of the two, the tax policies set the tax rates, what people are supposed to pay, but what determines what people actually end up paying is the interaction between tax policies and the way that the taxes are administered. And when it comes to the income tax, in today's rich countries, the progressivity of the income tax is what is allowing rich countries to do large amounts of redistribution from rich to less well-off households. And so this is a critical way of achieving that type of redistribution also in low and middle income countries. And the backbone of the income tax has always been the ability of the tax administration to lean on formal employers to do withholding of income tax. So for example, in the UK, the very first income tax in the world failed because there was no withholding of it and it was impossible to enforce it. And the first successful income tax was achieved by forcing formal employers, in that case the government, to withhold income tax on civil servants. And so the idea that we could have an income tax that has no withholding regime is simply not viable. And so the question is then going to become, what type of withholding regime do you want to have? And we'll get into this in a little bit, but we want to be balancing sort of the typical things, the equity component of who ends up paying these withholding taxes, the efficiency aspects of how does it change people's decisions about what to consume and how to earn their incomes. And finally, there's all these administrative concerns that come into play with withholding taxes, sort of how do they help you enforce the overall income tax? And then I completely agree with what Akila was saying, that when you're leaning on large formal firms to do the withholding for you, you have to consider the sort of administrative burden that's being placed on those firms. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Did we?
Yeah, we have lost Michael.
I'm still here. Can you not hear me?
Yeah, good. Please go ahead.
Oh, you didn't hear what I was saying. I'm so sorry. Anyway, I'm thrilled to be here. Are you still able to hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. This is going to be a very fun panel to hear everyone's perspectives in. And so I wanted to sort of lay a little bit of groundwork by saying that when thinking about things like income taxes, it's crucial to consider separately, but also together, the interaction between the tax policies that dictate what people are supposed to pay and the way that taxes are administered, which ends up determining what people actually pay. And when we look at sort of the way that high-income countries structure taxation, the income tax is the one that does the heavy lifting for redistribution. So it's the income tax that's able to...
We have heard this thing, Michael, you can go ahead.
Oh,
Move.
Okay.
That part we have heard. So you start.
Okay.
Yeah, you start from the last thing you said was that putting informal sector, the burden of informal sector on big corporations. That was the last thing I heard from you.
Perfect. Thank you. So I totally agree that we need to consider the sort of the burden that's being placed on the firms that are intended to do the withholding. And I want actually to leave it there because I wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of the discussion as we go through the 6 questions, and so we can have a look back and forth on each of them.
Is that good for mine?
No, I think we can move to the specific questions now, which I've shared with you earlier, but I sent you a refresher.
Well, more or less we have covered. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I was saying that, the panelists have remarked on many things in your list. This 5 and 6 about tax evasion and compliance, I think these are the 2 points that perhaps we may do another round.
Fine. We can proceed that way, and then maybe we can come back to the earlier points because some of the panelists have picked the areas on which they want to elaborate further. So we can leave it to them, but we can do number 5 and 6 first.
Okay. And by the way, how long are we continuing with that?
We have till 6:30.
Okay. All right. So let us ration. Yes. So I would invite another round from our panelists. On the 2 specific questions, tax evasion. Starting with trust deficits. Yeah.
Yes. Sorry. Were you speaking to?
Okay. I was inviting Ali Fazal to reflect on these 2 things. Maybe he's not there. He's not there.
I'm here, but Dr. Saab, I can't, comprehend. What did you say? Your connection was weak.
Yeah, the connection was weak.
Okay. We are talking 2 things. Okay. Fazal, we are talking 2 things. Let me put them in 2 words. How to prevent tax evasion and how to find political solutions to reduce trust deficit between taxpayer and tax collector?
Thank you. This is a very interesting question, and as someone said, that we are below average in terms of tax collection, and as we create with GDP rebasing, we'll go down further. So this is really an embarrassing situation for Pakistan. So the thing is that how to evade tax, how to reduce this tax evasion, and how to increase the trust between the taxpayer and the tax collector, or a taxpayer and the state. So these two are somehow interlinked. So it's a kind of a chicken and egg problem: what to do and what to do not. The problem is this: for the past 10 years, because of the low tax collection, we try to, create that we need to have higher taxes collection, so we increase the tax rates, or we penalize the non-payer in a way that to ask them to give more. But that strategy is not really working in Pakistan, because if we see another parameter of undocumented economy, that is the cash in hand, the currency in circulation. So the currency in circulation, which was always high in Pakistan at about 22% of your broad money, has gone up to 29-30% in the past 5 years, ever since our emphasis on penalizing the non-filer, ever since our emphasis on getting the information from the banks and other sourcing on the non-taxpayer. So that is clearly not working. And the other problem is that the tax collection primarily is in the hands of FBR, which is a federal body, and the governance and the service delivery, which matters to people, where they see, okay, if we have the service delivery, then you pay the taxes. That's education, health, environment, policing, and similar social sector service delivery, that is in hand of the provinces. And there is misincentive on the both sides. The provinces do not have any big incentive in terms of tax collection, because they get their share from the divisible pool, and they spend. And while the federal government is supposed to collect the taxes, but the service delivery is not there. This misalignment is there, number one. Number two, that your rates are high, and because your service delivery is not good, so the bifurcation between the taxpayer and the tax collector or the state is increasing. And with all those new withholding taxes, as Akila mentioned that, and all those compliances, what we see, we have the people who tend to file, who tend to give them, want to document, are swaying away. I mean, Aquila belongs to a big company, they cannot, but a small SME business, if it is a private limited company, they are trying to sway away back to the proprietorship or partnership or something, and they try to siphon off some of their document taxes, document sector into a document. And one of the reasons, when I ask people, they say, okay, they have made us become withholding agent on behalf of our supplier. And the supplier is very clearly, he doesn't want to pay taxes. He doesn't want his name to come in. But if that is the cost on our side, and we don't become competitive with our competition, who is working in the informal economy. So it's better to us to move in the informal economy slowly and gradually, and they are doing that way. So we need to break that shatter. So it's a very difficult thing. Okay, in the last year, when the Shabbar Zaidi came, and he talked about, tax reforms, and he coming from a very different, from a background of a tax consultant, but he at the same time had a huge target of 5.5 trillion tax, which was impossible to achieve from the day one. And when you were trying to achieve that, how can you rationalize that? So we need to understand that once we need to have the trade deficit, you need to lower the taxes where people are paying, you need to simplify the form where people are paying, and you need to incentivize where people are not paying. So the basic concept of economics is the marginal person you need to get back into the system. So if you lower the tax rate, the marginal person will get in. If you higher the tax rate, the marginal person will go out. And then there is then the cash economy which is going on. There is a transaction cost associated with it, but that transaction cost is borne by the state banks and the state, but not borne by the people. So we need to make work on that side. So my simple solution is, which I've been emphasizing in my writing, in my conversation with everyone, is that we need to look on the digital means to find it, because for the past 30 odd years we've been trying one way or the other. 92 we came up with this withholding tax regime, and again 2015 we came up with this withholding tax regime. In both times we failed, and this time we failed miserably. And the informal economy pie is growing. So we need to bring that down. For that bring them down, we need to work on a different solution. And in today's world, with the technology, with the blockchain technology, with the payment system, cross checks and everything, you can work on that. I mean, there is a big economy in Pakistan that connects from the farmer or importer, distributor to the retailer. So there's a whole channel in that. You import something or you make something, then you go to the manufacturer, or you then from there you go to the distributor, sub-distributor, retailer to the consumer. That market is estimated at 1 lakh and $125 billion a month, a year. And these are the 4 lakhs. That comes about to be $600 billion a year. That's the transaction volume we are talking about in an economy which...
Thank you, Ali. Thank you. Let me move on to Ms. Akila Mumtaz with the same questions, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'll be a little bit more simple in my response with respect to tax evasion. I think in the last couple of years, we have seen that more and more people do want to register themselves as filers, partially because of the prohibitive rate that has been, withholding tax rate that has been put in place for non-filers. But also, I think with the change in government, there was a desire by Pakistanis to do the right thing. Unfortunately, if you want somebody to move into the tax net, and he's been working off the grid for the last 20 years, then obviously he'll come with a history. The first tax return that he files, if that happens to be a 2019 tax return, and then in 2020, he suddenly gets hit with a tax demand that goes back 5, 6, 7, 8 years, then he's not going to want to continue to be part of the tax net. And that's exactly what has happened in the last year and a half. The tax filer number almost doubled from 1 million to 2.5 million. But between October and March today, practically everybody who had filed their tax returns have also been questioned on those assessments. And with the end result that anything that is unexplained is now sitting on a 30% tax demand against that amount, whether that was wealth that was created or whether that was income that was generated. And it's not easy for people who file that tax return to now go around contesting their positions and trying to explain it, because the cost of compliance is extremely expensive for anyone, whether you're an individual or whether you're a big company. And I do think that sort of mindset that once somebody is coming into the tax net, you immediately catch them and then you try to squeeze them further, is what is preventing people from taking that first step and getting themselves registered. And I think for that, the government will need to probably swallow a bitter pill and decide that they will give amnesty to people for 4, 5, 6 years, so that they can come into the tax net and start operating there comfortably and develop some trust with the government over a period of time. Even when I'm saying this, I know that this is discriminating people like me, who's a salaried person and who has been part of the tax net for a very long time, as well as my company, because we have been carrying the disproportionate burden of taxation for the longest possible time. But I do think that we will continue to carry that disproportionate burden if you don't encourage other people to come in. And the only way to do that is not harass them the second they have come into the tax net. Thank you.
Thank you. Sebastian?
Yes, thank you for this. I think these are all very great points. Just a few things I want to add. Collecting taxes is not an easy task. It's very, very difficult. You don't expect people to willingly come and pay taxes. It's a combination of, I would say, tax morale, which is how the taxes are spent, and tax enforcement, which is how you're punished if you don't pay. And you do need both. You need the push and the pull factors. But these are not something that can be solved in a short while. These takes several decades to work out. On the enforcement side, you're talking about when we talk about withholding taxes, what Ali Khizar was mentioning was he says that there's more informality because of the withholding structure. And that kind of jumps out at you, because the purpose of the withholding is to collect taxes from people who do not pay. And so you want to be able to collect taxes from anybody who is interacting with a person, and you want to pick up the taxes so that the person who's not likely to pay taxes would at least pay some taxes through the withholding. That is clearly the purpose of the withholding. But the problem is when you rely on it too much, then it becomes counterproductive, because then you may actually, instead of bringing new people in, you may want to you may end up taking the people who are already in out. So it's not uncommon to use withholding. The key question is how much withholding, and the question is what is the burden of the withholding. So as I said, if your withholding tax is not adjusted to what your true liability is, then it becomes like a cascading tax on sales, because essentially you pay tax on your sales, and that's not a part of the VAT. It's just you just keep taking tax out of your every transaction, and all those taxes go to the FBR. And we also juxtapose that with the number of tax returns being filed, which is a very small number. So what happens is, for many people, the withholding tax becomes a final tax because they are not filing returns and adjusting the taxes. So ideally, you want to have a broad withholding regime, but then people could file their tax return and adjust it and take back the money that is excess. So on the one hand, you have one distortion is, maybe too many aspects of the economy, there's withholding tax, and therefore that amount of withheld tax may be too high, which creates cash flow problems for businesses. On the other hand, you have this issue that you're not even able to get back what is your the excess that you paid. So it's not just a cash flow, it becomes a final tax because you're not filing tax returns. And nothing stops people from filing tax returns. This is a question I asked. Why is it that people are not filing returns, despite the fact that a lot of their incomes have been withheld and it's lying with FBR? It's something that needs to be worked on, because the sense you get is that if people says, I will never get my refund, there's no question of me getting my refund from FBR. So there are certain things that you can work on. So the idea is that to deal with evasion, withholding is a very important tool. But then you can't use it too much. You need to move from withholding to information management. So the idea of going to do withholding is to collect tax from people who may not be paying taxes, but that can also be done in a lighter manner, is by knowing the information about people who ought to be paying taxes. So you collect information, not the tax, and use the information to then go after people who haven't filed the returns by cross-matching what they filed and what the information in the background. So and that is a transition. As I said, most countries start with a lot of withholding, and then they move towards information management. And there are some structural problems we noticed in the past. For example, Ali Khizar mentioned about the withholding on banks transaction, which is actually a very, I would say, a very I would very, very difficult provision, I guess, for many people. The moment they deal with the bank, they get tax cut. That has to be maybe modified. You want to be able to apply those on people who are dealing with cash, people who are non-filers, but you don't want to apply them on people who are already filing returns. But it's interesting, in Pakistan, you have two rates, one for non-filers and filers. But the fact is that if you're a filer, then why do you need to be withheld, tax to be withheld? Because your information is anyway with the agency. All you need is, instead of withholding the tax from the filers, you need to collect the information of that transaction, which can go to FBR, and that can be used for the processing to see if this filer is filing correct or not. But the key fact is that you want non-filers to be taxed, so that they will be forced to come back to the tax agency and file and settle their returns and settle the numbers. And then of course these are all these transitions from non-filer to filer are tough, are very difficult. What Akila mentioned, I think, is very critical. When you want to do this major transformation, you may want to have some kind of regime to bring new taxpayers in. So if I say one thing that we can do better is, I would say, information management. Bring new taxpayers into the system, and to the good use of information. I think that is where we can work on, and that's where we can work on the evasion part. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. Michael?
Everyone, I think these were fantastic interventions. I wanted to say a couple things, mostly echoing things that have been said before, but perhaps presenting them slightly differently. So on the question of tax evasion, I think it's important to try and divide this into sort of detecting evasion and then sort of doing something about it. And so on the detecting evasion side, as the economy starts to become more documented, that generates this paper trail that becomes the sort of the fuel with which we can do tax enforcement. And as the economy becomes more digitized, that means that you can very easily now put together all these bits of paper trail that are now digital and do data analytics on them at a massive scale, which allow you to detect the widespread misreporting that exists in the economy. And again, a valuable part of that paper trail is the information that's generated by withholding regimes. But the withholding regimes do two things. They generate information, and they potentially generate revenue from people who are not tax filers. On top of that, there's two other sources of information that are important. There's sort of information sharing within the government. It's not just the tax administration that has very valuable information about how people are conducting their economic lives. And also there's information that the private sector holds that may be extremely useful for the tax administration. I'm thinking here of things like utility companies that have valuable information about the scale of businesses. And then even within the tax administration, it's important to try and generate and foster this culture of the generation and diffusion of information across parts of the tax administration. So as Ali was mentioning, information that comes from customs about what's being imported and by who is extremely valuable for then enforcing things like a sales tax, where that item that's being imported moves down the value chain. And so we have sort of this wide range of tools with which to detect tax evasion. And then the question becomes, okay, if we now know more about who's likely to be evading taxes, how can we address this? And sort of the traditional tool here has always been audit. And at the end of the day, voluntary compliance is going to come from the credible threat of audit and penalty. And so then if you think about how to organize audits, well, audit firepower is extremely scarce. And so that means that it's extremely important to be able to target the capacity that is available extremely well. And here again, the data analytics comes in. Once you have a large swath of data with which to detect evasion, that also can help you figure out where interventions by auditors are going to be most effective. And it also means that sort of large-scale light touch audits can largely be automated. You can set up systems, and these systems already exist in Pakistan to some extent, through which notices are sent to taxpayers automatically to say, please rectify this in your return. It doesn't look like this is correct. And then that can spill over onto the person who's implied as the counterparty. A second component of this is legal firepower. And so if at the end of an audit or some determination by a tax commissioner, there's a dispute that needs to be resolved quickly and fairly. And if there are delays in that, that has two implications. That means that there are revenues that are tied up until the dispute is resolved. And as the backlog of cases builds, that backlog of revenue also gets very, very large. And secondly, it means that if people start to realize that it's feasible to just delay the collection of disputed amounts indefinitely in the courts, that means that audits are going to start losing their credibility. And if audits start losing their credibility, then that voluntary compliance that the audits are supposed to generate is going to deteriorate. A third component of this is sort of strong political backing. If influential individuals and businesses can send very strong signals to other taxpayers that compliance is the new norm and that it should be upheld, but that requires the political backing to follow through on that. And a fourth component of this is something that's been mentioned previously by Ali especially, is the automation of basically everything that's possible to automate. Automation is going to do at least two things that are very valuable here. It's going to remove a bunch of discretion from tax officials, and that's going to have the benefit that the rules that are written down are the same ones that are going to apply to all taxpayers. It's going to level the playing field for taxpayers. And by removing any direct interactions between taxpayers and tax officials, that removes the temptation for impropriety on both sides of the transaction. And so that can also be extremely valuable. I wanted to also say a couple of words about withholding, because I think that this does come back over and over again. As Sebastian very clearly laid out, for people who don't file a tax return, withholding tax becomes a final tax. And so we can think of these as a bit like an excise tax. And so if you do think about these as excise taxes, then how to set up a sort of good withholding regime has to balance these three objectives. The first one is going to be the efficiency of the revenue that's raised. If something becomes a final tax, that's effectively raising the after-tax price that consumers have to pay or that firms have to take a lower profit on. And so we need to know about how much this distorts the consumption of the goods that are being withheld. A second component here is equity. Part of the reason we want withholding taxes is to be able to enforce an income tax, and part of the reason we want an income tax is to be able to do redistribution. And so we want to study how the withhold revenue is being borne by rich versus poor households, and how that interacts with the progressivity of the income tax and other indirect taxes that exist. And finally, I think perhaps the biggest benefit of a withholding regime is that it allows you to enforce an income tax. And so it's important to think through which of the parts of the withholding regime are the ones that are able to generate that enforcement dividend, or which ones are the ones that help you to enforce the income tax, and keep those, and perhaps consider removing some of the other parts. And then a fourth thing that I didn't mention, but that Akila mentioned that I think is very important here, is when the withholding regime becomes extensive, you do need to think about what you're asking of the people who are withholding agents, that you're starting to ask a very large favor from them.
Can I maybe add a little bit to the discourse over here regarding the information that is now available and what the government is doing with it? So just related to that, I think the current government, and I think Dr. Waqar will bear me on this, they've done a very good job in reconciling information probably for the first time. So now the bank information is pretty much available with the tax authorities. They also have a lot more information today based on the information sharing that is happening under the OECD guideline from offshore countries that allows these guys to now know who are the high net worth individuals and where their properties are and what to do with them. But I'll go back to my original point, and that is that once you have that information and you have people that are slowly and quietly coming into the tax net, if you immediately jump on that information and you start taking very harsh measures, then people will stop coming into the tax net and they will go back to evading taxes again. So there has to be some sort of a gap or breathing space or a quiet period between encouraging them to come onto the the grid and then using that information to run audits and collect taxes from tax evasion. And I do think that the current authorities are, or at least in the last 6 months, they've jumped down pretty hard on people who have recently joined the tax net, and I'm afraid that this is going to discourage new joiners next year.
So, Waqar, I thought there was maybe one question that I've not heard a lot of discussion about. Maybe you could ask the speakers to have a quick round on that, and then we can take some questions, which is the question of equitably balancing out tax rates across different income levels. And maybe it'd be good to get some views on that, and then we can have some questions from the audience. Gee, did you hear my suggestion? I had suggested that maybe we can have one quick round from the panelists on the first question, which is equitably balancing out tax rates across income levels to broaden the tax base. Are you okay with the panelists answering that question? Okay, he's speaking, but I can't hear him. I don't know whether others can.
No, we cannot.
I can't either.
Okay, so we'll assume that this is being asked by Dr. Waqar Khan, and then we can brief him on that later. So if you could just have a quick round on this question before we go to the audience, please. We can start with the same order. Ali Khizr could go first, and then Akila, and then Sebastian, and then Mike.
Yes, that's a very interesting question, Dr. Nabi. If we see that manufacturing sector in Pakistan is heavily taxed, while the tax on the services income is very low, and there's virtually no tax on the agricultural income. So the implication of this is that people have moved from the manufacturing sector in Pakistan, and we have prematurely moved from agriculture to services economy, and that is one prime reason for having a frequent boom bust cycle, which you mentioned earlier in your introduction, that what needs to take Pakistan out of this frequent boom and bust cycle is to build up the manufacturing base before we move up to the services economy. For an economy of size of 200 million people, it is next to impossible to move to a services economy with the kind of education level we have. That's simply not possible, and that kind of a model is simply not solution. So, the sentence I'm going to use, I heard first from you as well, that if you have say, let's say $1 million in Pakistan, which is about 15 crore rupees in Pakistan, where would you invest? Will you invest in an SME manufacturer, or will you come up with a small shop of a coffee restaurant, XYZ or anything? And when you see the people around us, I haven't seen a single case moving to the SME manufacturing in the past 10 years or so. Everyone has moved to the services sector, be it retailing, be it the wholesale, be it trading, or anything. So that is the fundamental thing we need to change, that we need to make it easy for the compliance of the manufacturing sector. We need to make the tax rates low for the manufacturers. We need to encourage people to move towards the manufacturing sector. So the formality of the manufacturing sector has actually resulted in this. Now, there is some advantage of manufacturing sector. You get the access, you have access to credit to the formal sector versus the non-manufacturing sector. The problem is this: with the kind of fiscal deficit and with that formal sector credit has shrunk. It was 27% of GDP in 2007. It is 16% of GDP today. That's very low. So with this kind of a credit base, the credit space for the SME has gone down. It was SME credit space was 20% of GDP in 2004. It's 4% of 20% of private credit in 2004, and it's 4% of private credit today. So now that benefit is actually not there. Even why would anyone want to move to the manufacturing sector? The other reason I would like to put in that because
I need to move on to the next panelist. I'm sorry, because we're running short on time. So Khizr has given a good perspective on sort of sectoral balance and why lightly taxing one sector compared to the other means that investment will move there, and indeed we see that pattern. But I thought we should also have some response on equitable treatment across income groups, not across sectors, but across income groups. So Akila, your view on that, please.
Jay, before I jump into that, I'd just like to say that actually it's a misnomer that services sector is taxed less. As per the law that came out in 2015, services sector actually have an 8% minimum tax on it, which was reduced to 3% last year. It's just that the enforceability is probably not the same. And I mean, compared to 0.25% or 1% minimum tax on manufacturing, you're talking about 3% reduced last year. Otherwise, 8% of your total revenue was directly being taxed if you could not demonstrate a profit. So that's ridiculous.
What Khizr had in mind was retail services rather than telecommunications, which is different.
Gee, so I think it's retail side ke upar. I think the biggest problem is enforcement, and because otherwise the same laws apply.
Yeah.
It's just that the enforcement is probably not being done at the same level, and it's easier for them, obviously, to run tax evasion. But when we talk about equitable taxation, I think one of the key aspects that we need to consider is that when you charge somebody, whether it's an individual or whether it's a company, 30% of their total profitability in taxation, then globally, then there are certain tax credits or benefits that you're given when you spend in the economy. So as an individual in other parts of the world, you get tax credits if you take a mortgage or if you go into auto loans and things like that. In Pakistan, those benefits are extremely minimal, which means that while when your income starts going up, you do start getting a higher tax rate, but at the same time, there's no incentive given to you to contribute back into the economy. And that, I think, is problematic. The second area where I think equitability goes out the window is the advanced withholding tax regime, which ranges from 5 to 12.5% on consumer goods, which is there when you're buying petrol or when you're paying telecommunication charges, or whether you're buying an airline ticket. And majority of that money is charged to people who are not part of the income tax bracket, which means that my guard, when he's putting petrol in his car, in his motorbike, is also paying income tax, whereas he probably does not fall in the income tax bracket. And I think those anomalies need to be done away with as and when the country is moving towards a more formal regime, because it creates the kind of imbalances and easy cash acquisition by the government, which becomes a problem to eliminate. And it's disequilibrium.
Yeah, no, quite right. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can come in.
Sure, please do.
Request you, because we are hitting the limit also. My first submission.
We have 10 more minutes.
Is that
we have 10 minutes.
Okay. Yes. I am. My first observation is that I feel very well enlightened, extremely enlightened by the discourse of four learned experts of the field. they have given me an enormous in the new budget. And there's plenty that is planned, and let's see how far we accomplish. At the very outset, let me just see what we are doing presently in FPR. Our first.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Waqar, but you know your voice is breaking. Waqar, your voice is breaking.
And we are expecting to take this.
Waqar, your voice is breaking. May I suggest that you may I suggest that you turn off the video because the voice is really breaking. So if you turn off the video, we'll be able to hear your wonderful words.
Oh, is this better? I have turned off. Am I audible now?
Yes, it's better. Yes, please proceed.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, please proceed. Yes.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please proceed.
Can you hear me? Oh. So. Thank you. I was saying that what we have started doing first and foremost is to expand. I'm saying that
Dr. Nabi, we can't hear him. Can't hear Dr. Waqar.
I think you know I've never had that problem on Zoom with Waqar, so I just don't know what to say.
Okay, so we have looked at very closely FBR's own database, and there is a reservoir of information, and for us to go and ask people why they are not filing returns. And generally, this thing has come, filer, non-filer. I'm opposed to such distinction. Every person is required to file a return if it's his or her income is above the threshold. And withholding taxes, we are aware that they are numerous, and many of them are not even yielding a mentionable return. So out of 65, we have about 25 that are meaningful withholding taxes, and we can get rid of about 40 odd withholding taxes, which we plan to do in 2 installments beginning this fiscal year. I mean, Akira said something which is very close to my heart. She said that, I mean, if there is a self-assessment scheme on every small reason tax man is or women are asking questions, and that if a year is going by in the 5-year that you can do audit, so unnecessarily they would raise demands. And I've also heard some cases in which the amnesties are being opened up. All those things are on our radar, and we have we are looking at it carefully, all government assurances carefully, government assurances, all government that have been provided to the taxpayers should not assurances and okay. And also said that it's very low. Allow me to say that to an extent is what I would call cost of change in government. And once the government changes, frankly, there are many disruptions and continuity is broken. And that is historical. This is also a period that is awful. And during, and coupled with COVID, economic activities have significantly declined. And one can rationalize why case of massive devaluation and high interest rates. First, in the first year, in an ad hoc fashion, there, in an ad hoc fashion, and COVID. So, no justification. I totally agree that COVID. So, no justification. I totally agree. Time can generate value.
So I just spoke with Waqar, and he's saying that it's a pity that technology is not allowing him to be heard. He has a lot of he's taken detailed notes, and he has some good insights that he wants to share based on the discussion that we've had so far. But he can't do it if his voice is so distorted. It's not reaching us. So he's suggesting that perhaps in the next event that we hold in this series, he can take a little bit of time and bring all of those issues to the fore, giving the government's perspective on these issues. So I think that will be useful. But I leave it to the bank team to decide that. And I'm really sorry that that technology failed us this time around. And I would seriously urge that, whatever evidence people have shared here suggests that while WebEx is very good on many things, it requires a much larger bandwidth than Zoom. And therefore it results in these disruptions, especially if the connectivity issues in some government offices are not great. So with that in mind, my apologies again that it has not resulted in the kind of concluding part of this discussion that we would have had, because Waqar is both very knowledgeable and very articulate, and I think he really benefited from the discussion today. So let's
Ijaz, I have a point. I don't know where Dr. Waqar left at a very crucial point, but he mentioned something that says that they're going to reform the withholding regime and they're going to remove withholding from many regimes. I'm a little bit concerned that, if you remove the withholding regimes, you should retain the information regimes. So even though you don't ask people to pay the taxes, but you need to know the information of the people who are doing the transaction. And if they remove that, they're going to throw the baby with the bathwater. And that is very, very critical. So, in the process of cleaning up, the key thing is it's not about the collecting of the money, it's the collecting of the information. And I think that they should not give up. The second part of the amnesty is also... Yeah, and the amnesty, there can be amnesty from audit.
Can I give you comfort?
No, thank you, Khan Sahib.
Yes, please give us comfort. आप बोलिए
आराम सेबेस्टियन वो ये बहुत ही जल्दी से उचक्के जो है ना नताइज पे पहुंच गया है we are not going to give away the information requirements if we remove the text. Okay, so these texts have little yield, and the information requirement that they provide will continue to be applicable. Okay, so if, for instance,
That's great.
A function in a hotel, etc.
Yeah.
All the text will not be deducted, but information will be required to be reported to the text authority.
Fantastic. So Waqar, I'm relaying this, whatever you were saying, directly via my laptop speaker. So I think people can hear you. Do you?
Yeah. We can hear you. We can hear you loud and clear.
I have to go, but I'm telling them I would address them. I will give them a chance to question me all. All right.
Okay, very good. So we've agreed that in the next session we will have a special provision where you can give your overall assessment based on today's discussion, and also engage on some of the recommendations that have been made.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay. So thank you, Waqar, and I'm sorry that we had connectivity problem, but we'll make up for it. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. So Najmi, how do you wish to proceed?
So I wanted to say this is the start of a conversation. As you had said in your intro remarks, we want to have other sessions on tax, and let's definitely set aside time, as Dr. Waqar kindly offered, to come back and clarify these points. So let's definitely do that. And as much as these webinars allow us to connect more people and have a broader reach, it works until we have connection issues where unfortunately today we had some issues on that front. And we in fact chose WebEx because the evidence shows that it consumes less bandwidth than Zoom, but maybe it's not the case, so we'll try the other as well. Not sure what was the problem today, but definitely let's set aside time in the next iteration with Dr. Waqar, because this is a vast topic and the start of a conversation. We will have more to say. Over to you, Jazz.
That's wonderful, and you know it's also great that this kind of platform is being used for this conversation, because I think the quality of exchange can be really good when you have diverse stakeholders talking to each other on these critical issues. And I'm delighted that we were able to put together the panel we did, because I benefited a lot, and I'm sure the audience benefited a lot from it also. So with that, perhaps because I mean we had provision for some questions, but I think we have frittered away some of the time because of the connectivity issues. So maybe we can take one or two questions if there are some very.
Let's do that. Let's speak maybe one or two questions and take a few more minutes if for those who have time. But I don't see where are the questions. So.
Yes, Dr. Nabil, the questions are on the right-hand side in the chat.
Okay.
I can read them out for you.
Yeah, I think best to read them out, please.
Okay, the first question is, with regard of present taxation system, the public at large is still suffering. What do you think is the benefit of this taxation hike? Question number 2 is, integrating income tax collection across federal and provincial governments should be a straightforward exercise. What are the hurdles preventing this? Third question is, what are the options in the current socio-political environment for the option for the country to lower its rate on CIT to potentially improve business environment or raise its rates on the lower tiers of personal income in order to reduce its revenue loss, while also not adversely impacting income distributions?
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's stop here and let's give the panelists the opportunity to respond. I think the more specific one is the last one. So if I don't know who wants to address that. Akila, would you like to address the last question?
Yes, I think Dr. Vakar should have been here for these three questions because all of these three are addressed to the government per se. But interestingly enough, right now, the government is not just collecting tax in the form of CIT, they're also collecting tax as minimum tax. So even if a company is not liable to pay income tax returns, they're still required to pay an advance tax, which is then adjusted against tax liability for future years. So I find it very hard to actually explain the tax code to a third party whenever we are having these conversations, because there's not just income tax being collected, there's also advance tax being collected. There are cash flows that are going to the tax authorities, which are not considered collected tax from their perspective, but which are a drain on a business. Then other than that, there are, as Ali Fazal was saying earlier, there are other charges also that are put in on the company, which include charges like WWF and WPPF, which are being collected by the revenue authorities, but which is not going to where they're supposed to go, the spending. So unfortunately, I'm pretty much on the side of the question asker, saying that there's a problem with the way the tax code is developed right now and it needs to be fixed.
Okay, great. Let's take one more question. Sharmeen, can you read out one or two more?
Yes.
May I also come out?
Sure, please go ahead.
After you take the questions. Yeah, so this point, I think, we've been belaboring about it. And clearly, withholding is not the only way of in which money is going to FBR. It's also through all these other levies, right? Minimum taxes, advance taxes, etc. It's very important for FBR to compare the actual liability with the liability that is pre-collected, because the purpose of withholding, there's nothing wrong with withholding. It's just that if there's too much money flowing out, and at the end of the year you need to claw it back, then it's essentially you're over withholding. So it's that kind of calibration is important. So maybe they need to find out sector by sector, what are the amounts flowing into FBR and what is the actual liability, and then over time adjust the rates. That calibration is very important. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Michael, did you wish to say anything?
I wanted to echo what Sebastian was saying about the rates. I think, imagine you just abandoned withholding completely, but kept only the information requirement. Then basically the only income tax that's being paid by non-filers also disappears. And so your ability to extract revenue from the informal sector has gone away, and a big part of the incentive to formalize is going to go away as well. And so really it's about calibrating the rates. You want to think about what are the things that you should have withholding on. You should be targeting high-income individuals who should be paying income tax, and then figuring out what's the right rate to set on that. And the same thing goes for minimum taxes and advanced taxes.
Okay,
so
great.
Deterrent evasion versus revenue now.
Thank you. Let's take just one more question and then bring this to a close. Sharmeen?
And the next question is, has any realistic analysis ever been done as to why the tax reforms measures taken during the last 2 decades have not produced desired results? It's not being felt that there is a need to reform the reforms.
I think let's take this question, because this is something that I think all analytical work, whether it's the World Bank or the IMF or say IGC, I think we should have the front page should be what are the different reforms that have been initiated in the last 2 decades, and just plot the tax to GDP ratio by major taxes, and then point out the years where tax reform initiative was done, and then see whether there is any change in that trajectory because of the reform initiative. I think this would be an eye-opener. It would be very useful summary information, and it'll be very informative. And then, we could have a column which says, what happened? Why didn't implementation go through? It'd be a very useful summary page starting with all our reports, because frankly, enormous amount of analysis has been done. And I think the question is bang on target. Sebastian, do you want to say anything on that?
There are, reforms are not easy. There are some of them, it's like writing a ship, it takes several years to set things right. And I thought Pakistan was on the right trajectory over the last few years when they started going up from, 9-10% and then went up to 12.5. So I don't know what happened the last year where it's kind of suddenly reversed. So there are parts of it that are dependent on the economy clearly, and parts of it are reform driven. But I felt that especially a lot of the cleanup on the exemptions removal really pushed up, jacked up the economy, the collections quite a bit. But some of these things, can become some of these reforms, like especially when I talk about when you use too many regimes, can actually become counterproductive. People, when you start hitting the same people over and over again, then you disincentivize them from being formal. So the harder task is to broaden the base, get people who are not into the system. And I think those are the much more difficult. Now, there are some clues that you could see, right? One clue is how much you collect on sales tax from services and how much you collect on sales tax from goods. There's a very clear difference. The sales tax on goods are much, much higher than sales tax on services. And that's because the provinces collect services and the FBR collects goods. So then you begin to understand that there might be something there, because it's not that services is such a small part of the economy, it's a big part of the economy. So why is that happening? And that's fundamentally a weakness in the regime, because you have GST on sales and services actually coming from the provinces. Second part is about the whole aspect of the agriculture income. Now, it's true that agriculture income is not, you don't get much revenue from agriculture income. You don't expect much revenue from agriculture income. We actually did a study on that. However, when you... There is
a very good study. There is a very good study done about 2 or 3 years ago, which estimates the actual revenue you can expect from agriculture and why this tax is more to put an end to a huge loophole rather than... Yeah. So there's a good study.
Loophole than anything else. So those kind of things, reforms can happen, I think, where, so there are places where you can plug the gaps. So I think the key thing about when I talk to FBR, I said, spend a lot of time on broadening the base. You can take time and try to improve compliance. Compliance improvement is important, but I guess it's very important to broaden the base. I think this idea of filing returns, if you are withholding and FBR is happy that the money is coming in, that gives them a sense of complacency that, we collected a tax, but that's not the part. That's just the first part. Actually making sure that the right people pay is the more difficult task. And for that, you need to do information management. You need to take the information and make sure people are filing, people are collecting. You need to give refunds to the people who deserve the refunds. This is the hard tasks that need to be undertaken. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
So can I, if I can take maybe just 1 minute, and I think over here I'm now going to talk on behalf of the government. I think one of the most difficult interactions that I've experienced in my entire career is with the tax authorities. And it's not because of their attitude or because of their expectations or because of all the reasons that you hear in the papers. It's because of the fact that they are assigned targets which are being checked on a monthly basis, and their careers depend on it. So you're now talking to professionals whom the government has invested a lot of money on, teaching them about the tax code. But every single month, they're worried about being able to touch a target number that has been arbitrarily assigned to them. And if you go and look at the targets of FBR for the last 10 years, you will note that every single year, the target was maybe 10 or 12% higher than what the growth in the economy was. So policy reforms were maybe not introduced, But at granular tax collection level, the implementation direction given to the people was very clear, and that was collect the next billion from wherever you can get it, regardless of what the policy is saying, which meant that policy reforms probably never came into play. And I think this is where I would like to request entities like the World Bank and IMF to take a step back and give some breathing space to the tax authorities to allow the tax reforms and policy reforms to actually come into play. That means that there is going to be a flat period for 1 or 2 years. So when Sebastian starts panicking about one bad year, it panics me a lot more, because then I know that there's pressure that's going to come from multilateral agencies. And the people who are going to end up paying is people like us who are already paying. And we then get squeezed for the next 2 or 4 odd billion, which we shouldn't be paying to take care of the missing numbers.
Actually, Akila makes an extremely important point. I think when we do the plotting of that tax to GDP ratio and the reform measures, and whether or not there is any correlation between the trajectories of the one and the reform effort, I think we need to keep in mind the periodic boom and bust cycle that Pakistan goes through, the need to go to the IMF, the need to make a very rapid adjustment in the fiscal, and the result that follows from there, which is this is your target. You meet this target regardless of what happens to the reform effort. So I think we need to take a good look at whether the need to meet the reform target because there's an IMF program on, whether that sometimes conflicts with the structural reform that the government has been engaged in. This is something, this comes up as a question. Akila has articulated it well. I've heard it from lots of other people as well. This is not to say that the government shouldn't adjust the fiscal. It's a question of making sure that that adjustment does not come at the expense of some ongoing reform efforts. This is something we need to think about a little bit.
Akila put me on the spot, so if you don't mind, I'd like to. Sorry, Ali, just if you don't mind. So 2 things. I think we always stress on, at least the World Bank, is on broadening the base. I think quality of revenues is more important than quantity of revenues, and especially the World Bank, for us, equity, collecting the right amount is extremely important. I've always stressed on widening the tax base. And I've worked on this. In fact, we've asked them to collect information. In fact, the idea of moving from tax number to the CNIC number is the way to go, where you can truly integrate all these databases. Now, I remember we had problems with even banks not sharing information because they were only paying the taxes but not giving the information about who's being withheld. Even telecom, they were not giving the information about the people on whom the tax was withheld. They were just giving a lump sum. So those kind of quality improvements are extremely important. The second point is, remember, we're talking about tax to GDP ratio. If your GDP does badly, your tax is also doing badly, your ratio will remain the same. But when the tax to GDP ratio goes down, your GDP that means your tax is not keeping up with GDP. Therefore, there is a problem with the tax system. And that is where they may need to find a way to adjust that.
I have a particular answer to that. Yeah, I've done numbers on that, and the last year when we talk about the tax rate come down, it's basically our dependency of tax collection on imports is very high. We connect about, depending upon 1 year to other, 46 to 47% of our taxes are collected in import state, be it GST, be it withholding tax, be it advance income tax, be it custom duty, be it regulatory duty, and you name it. There are many. And in 2019, we ran an import compression policies, and imports came down from around $60 billion a year to about 40 something billion dollars. So that is one reason for the decline in tax rate. And I've done some number, and I can share those numbers. These are the FDR numbers. So there is no other major change coming up from that, other than sales tax on domestic collection has actually improved because the zero rating was removed. I'm sure Waqar Masood could tell us more about it. He has all the numbers in his mind. But that's one reason. So you cannot say this from one year, and I second Akila that me and Akila and all those people, we can't really take that burden for that. You need to find out the reason why the tax collection was low. That's there. So now this year imports are coming back to the normal level. So give this a one more year and then talk about this. That's a simple thing. Yeah.
Okay, so I now get the impression that we need to have FBR in the room so that they can be part of this discussion, and certainly Vakar to be in the room. So maybe it'd be a good idea to continue this discussion as part of a subsequent event. And with that, Naji, if you agree, maybe we can bring today's session to a close.
Absolutely, and I want to particularly thank you, Ijaz, for managing this session given the technological constraints that we had, and really thank all our panelists and all of you for your participation. And I hope next time we'll continue the conversation. And we try to have the technology work. That was a bit of a problem, but the exchange was excellent. I personally learned a lot, and I think this interaction between very different stakeholders was extremely useful, and that's the model we should keep in the future iterations. Over to you, Ijaz, for closing remarks.
Thank you. And I want to join you in thanking the panel. Khizr, we all know is articulate always. Akila is a great addition to the list of participants on tax issues. She was reluctant. I'm very glad she agreed to come on the panel, and I think she brings great insight. And of course, Michael knows the Pakistani tax system very well and is actually working with Vakar on some of the issues, and Sebastian is glad to actually video meet Sebastian. He comes across as a great panelist. So thank you everybody for your time, and thank you. We had a very large, vast national and international people register for today's session.